Cool. So we want to talk a little bit with each other about Holo and Holochain and the differences and get clear about the different parts, especially because we have the white papers have been coming along and are approaching completion. They're not complete, but they're pretty solid. And I know that not everybody loves reading white papers, so let's kind of at least get us all connected to what the content is. And if you really want to go geeky, you should read the Holochain white paper, because that one's like all formal math and stuff. And so let's start with that, actually. Holochain white paper. Eric's vision of a white paper is very academic, and Nico almost amplifies that in a good German way. And so the Holochain white paper, that they basically took my outline and then began formalizing a lot more deeply. And then when we started talking about some of the computational complexity stuff, which I'll explain in just a second, they've added those portions. And so the Holochain white paper is essentially the mathematical description of how Holochain is built, how the architecture works, and then having modeled that mathematically then allows us to do certain formulaic proofs, if you will, about our efficiency versus the efficiency of blockchain and proof of work and things like that. And, spoiler alert, we're way more efficient. And that's part of what the white paper is saying, and likely, we expect it to draw controversy, because many people just don't like having their sacred cows challenged, and it does that a bit. So the part of the heart of Holochain being more efficient has to do with an inversion that we do in the architecture, and you guys may have heard me talk about this some before, but I think it's something that we should all be able to talk about. So I just want to go into this a little bit. If you've read, did you guys read the email that I sent Michel Bowens that he leaked on the P2P wiki about consensus? And he was emailing about the energy problems with Bitcoin, and do we have solutions for that? And I sort of went on a rant about the inefficiency of Bitcoin and all of proof of work and all of consensus, that it wasn't just proof of work that was the problem, it was consensus that was the problem. And then went off on the reason for this being that basically all of blockchain and distributed computing is organized around what I call two fallacies about reality, which makes it work really hard. It makes it very complex to actually work. And because we have inverted that, we've changed that, ours is much simpler. And those two fallacies are that data exists and time exists. That may sound weird, but what I mean by that is that data has some independent existence. It is a factual standalone thing. When you create your ontology, your definition of beingness, when you build that up from that data exists. So for example, all of the crypto coins are built around a token-centric model, where a coin is a token. It's a cryptographic token. And the reason they have to manage consensus is they have to all agree about what tokens exist and are valid and haven't been spent yet, and that kind of thing. So we all have to agree about data, this data having some independent reality from the people using it and the people creating it or the people doing it. And that's what I mean by data exists. Like there's some list of authoritative data.
Can you back up just a second, because you're kind of going into some different pieces? Can you just start with what is Holochain and why I get this is sort of why you build it, but would you start with what is Holochain, what makes it different,
Right, for the outside audience, because so we're talking about Holochain and Holo. Holo is a blockchain alternative built on a different strategy for solving the same problem of of decentralized data. You're able to put basically build applications on top of Holochain, which in blockchain are often called smart contracts and that kind of stuff, sometimes dApps, distributed apps. Holochain is an engine for that, for us to be able to hold and share data together. Holo is built on top of Holochain as a bridge to get back from this fully decentralized world of Holochain to the world where people are operating now, so that people can actually access distributed apps and stuff just through a web browser and that kind of thing. And we're going to be selling little boxes for you to run as Holo servers and such, and you can actually earn a cryptocurrency for being able to run Holo servers. And so instead of doing mining on Bitcoin or Ethereum or those types of things, which is basically a kind of useless computation that gets thrown away, you can do useful computation of hosting applications to earn cryptocurrency. And meanwhile, that also grows a massive application hosting infrastructure that's completely distributed, decentralized. Is that good enough overview? Mm-hmm. All right. So we were going into Holochain. Why it's more efficient is because we're not coming from the point of reference that data has some independent existence, or that there is some kind of universal time. And what that means, because one of the real problems in distributed systems is you can't keep clocks perfectly within sync. You just can't. Computers are not very good at clocks, not at timekeeping. They're good-ish, but if you may have noticed, when you don't have your computer set up to like synchronize time with the internet, it creeps in time, relative to other clocks and stuff. And the other thing is that if you believe, 100 years ago, the general theory of relativity was published. If you believe that, time is really this construct. There is no absolute time between different things. There's just the sequence of events that you experience from your vantage point. And Holochain is built on that type of architecture, where each vantage point, each user or node or box, has its own immutable hash chain. So it's similar to a blockchain, except it's not blocks of things. It's just one thing at a time being created in a hash chain. And then those things are shared into a common space through a distributed hash table, which is eventually consistent, which means the information, we understand it takes some time to propagate, but you always know the sequence of events that occurred from every particular vantage point that recorded them. And the distributed hash table that you share things to validates the data that's being shared, making sure that it's following the rules for the application that's sharing it. I don't know how much more we want to go into Holochain, because I feel like at least most of the people here are pretty clear on that. And how do you feel about it?
I felt like it's more like how much everybody else feels.
Speak up so that...
I felt like it's more like how much everybody else feels. I think that's somewhat clear.
Okay.
My favorite phrase is the one comparing blockchain and BitTorrent, but I think that plays in people's minds who are slightly more technical in like a couple sentences. But
yeah, so if you want the sort of quick mashup, it's like Holochain takes the best of blockchain and the best of BitTorrent, which are both existing and proven technologies, and just mashes them up in a different way, which gives you greater efficiencies because it's agent-centric instead of token-centric. So, cool. So I then want to go to the Holo currency white paper, which is fresh in my mind. I already said Holo is kind of the bridge from the fully decentralized Holochain world back to the semi-decentralized world of the web and the totally centralized world of money and stuff. So we talked about the boxes already. We're going to be selling those in a crowdfunding campaign shortly, and have a few different models with different capacities. And there's a cryptocurrency that's going to be running on it, but this cryptocurrency is different than the other ones that we know of.
talk about what the boxes do again, hosting?
So the boxes, they run Holochain, first of all. So they allow you, as an owner of a box, to run your own Holochain apps. And so just to make that less abstract, Holochain right now comes with some sample apps, one of which is like a Twitter clone, another is a Slack clone, another is a coin toss game to show you the blend of public-private data, how to use that. Because when you write to your own chain, you don't have to expose every bit that you write to the public space. So you can run these distributed apps that should be able to scale to Twitter size, Facebook size, those kinds of things, which right now it's not really feasible to do on blockchain. It's the computational overhead on blockchain that prevents that. And the monetary overhead, what you pay to do the processing, prevents that. Did you have?
Yeah, so when you get a box, it comes with those apps?
When you get a box, it comes with Holochain, and you decide what apps you would want to install for your personal use. The box then becomes your personal data store, your foothold, where if you're using the Twitter thing and you tweet, you always have your history of things. You don't have to worry about getting that back from a Google or a Twitter or something like that, because it's already on your box that you own. Everything that you publish always is.
But those apps exist already.
Some apps exist and some apps don't, that we have planned and that we hope many others build. Like, we're trying to create an ecosystem to make it really fast and easy for building apps on Holochain. And then Holo is a way of, so Holo is another app on Holochain that creates a special kind of container for Holochain apps to run with an accounting system that allows people to use these boxes to host other people's home base. Like, this is your foothold, but other people may not be running a box. They may not have centralized servers. The apps need the hosting power for the tourists. And you basically get paid not for hosting your own stuff, but for hosting the tourists, basically.
Where do people, if they wanted to go through this other website, is it something they have to go through Holo, or?
They open their web browser and they type in a web address.
Okay, but then what does that happen? How does that have their data be? Like, does it keep it all separate then and not, like, if they go to
Way ahead of that's on here, but it's way down at the bottom in the end. Right. There's a currency running, and what I started by saying is this is not like Bitcoin or Ether, which are token-centric coins. This is essentially crypto accounting. This is, every transaction is a double entry balance between two endpoints, because each user has their own chain that things are being recorded in. When Fair and I do a transaction, it comes to both of our, we write it to both of our chains. And just to make it clear, I'm the only one who can write to my chain. She's the only one who can write to her chain. This isn't a shared space at all. This is just a space of one person's agency that's happening. But when we do a transaction, we actually construct the transaction, sign it, and then we both write it with the counterparty signatures to our own chains, which basically means once it's signed, it can't be tampered with. And once that comes on the top of our chain, nothing below it can be tampered with as well. This is part of what makes the chains immutable, is because when you start having things like this that are countersigned or shared, you can't go back and change anything in your history, or it'll break the hashes moving forward, and since it got signed by another person. I know this is a little technical, but in case there's crypto people listening. So that is the only kind of transaction that can happen is one where Fair and I are doing this thing, and therefore there's a certain amount of credits. There's 5 credits being transferred or whatever. So I'm going down 5, she's going up 5. You can tell somebody's balance basically by running through their chain and doing plus and minus for whether they were spending or whether they were receiving, and that tells you their current balance. That's different than coins. Those of you who haven't used crypto coins, it's basically a one-party spend. If you have the key to unlock the spending, you can unlock the spending and then you create new keys. But the receiving party actually has no say in that. Like if you want to incriminate somebody by transferring money to them and make them look guilty for something, you could do that. They can't say, no, I will not take this money, right? Like you can literally turn it over into their wallet, into their control, and they have no say over it. This is something where there's always a mutual agreement happening, which is a different architecture.
So does it work the same way for transferring or transacting with hosting credits as it does if we have a communication through one of the apps?
It basically is using the same tools, except it's a monetary transaction, not a tweet, right? And a tweet doesn't need to be countersigned, right? If I'm tweeting, I can write that to my chain and then share it. I don't need anybody else to say, yes, I agree to your tweet. I agree to let you say that, right? But if we're doing a transaction, that's an agreement between two of us, so we both have to sign it. So that's one difference. So the other thing about this, if you're thinking about this, is there's no single ledger that is a bottleneck. So while Fair and I are negotiating a transaction, if there's 1 million users on this network, if you want to share access to that, you have to give people specific access through capabilities tokens, which is a different conversation I wasn't planning to go into. But you can have private data. On the blockchain, you can't have private data. All the data, if it's a public blockchain, all the data is public. You can encrypt some of it, but it still has to be published in the one ledger. In this case, you can have a blend of private and public data that's actually getting signed into your history. So it's still tamper-proof. So you can know that data hasn't been changed, even though it was private, because its hash was published to the top of the chain.
So all of the data absolutism kind of stays in the realm of privately stored stuff, like in the same way that people have truths that they live by that aren't necessarily universal truths.
Yeah, so your chain is in an absolute state, right? Each person's chain is, and then the DHT is a distributed hash table. It's a place where we are throwing our bits of reality out into a shared space so we can find each other's information that needs to be published. So if I'm tweeting, obviously the point is I want people to be able to find my tweet. And so it's also, the DHT does linking, so you can come to my address and see what links go off to tweets and be able to find my tweets in the DHT. But we're still talking about Holochain here. I want to go back to the currency process. So again, part of why this is different than a coin. Coins, crypto people hate it when I say this, but coins are created by fiat. They're created from out of nothing. We don't create anything from fiat. For every credit that goes into somebody's account there's a balancing debit in another account. So I don't want to, I'm holding myself back from saying something about that. But there's a bunch of things about this design of this currency which are, what we're actually trying to do is change the game around cryptocurrencies to be more stable, responsible, so that economies can build on these things. Because right now, people have conflated store of value and medium of exchange, and they want the cryptocurrency to be a good store of value, meaning they want it to grow in value, which means nobody wants to spend their cryptocurrency, right? They want to hoard it, which means you can't really build an economy on top of it if people won't spend, right? So what we're building with Holo credits is a currency for micro hosting transactions that's backed by computing power of the network and valued against that computing power, because you can always buy hosting with it as a significant anchor, as a significant thing that a bit of value that people want to buy. And so what we're doing is anchoring the value of our currency to the value of computing. And cloud hosting, for example, is supposed to be 264 billion in revenue this year, total cloud hosting, not just the public hosting, which this is would be a part of. But there's a lot of value for this market. People are not saying, gosh, it's too cheap and easy for me to run my website. So yeah, I already mentioned microtransactions, but I just want to mention what that really means. That, the value, what you're getting paid for hosting will evolve over time. You also get to set your own prices, but you're competing in a market, so other people may underprice you, and if you want to be selected to host, you're going to have to end up being competitive. But it's very possible that on like a per transaction basis, you're talking about fractions of a penny's worth of hosting, because to just serve out a small icon or something like that, you can't charge a bunch of money for that. And so you need to be able to do lots of these microtransactions and aggregate them up to something that's actually worth billing the application provider for. So we have basically signed logs that are kind of like your web logs that you have now, except they actually are signed by both parties, what was being requested and what was returned, and the computation that was required, the computation and bandwidth that was required to service that. And you're charging for the computation and bandwidth, basically. And so the way that works is that log becomes your proof of service. So when you hit a particular threshold, you generate a proof of service invoice that you send to the application provider. So imagine that you're running some Airbnb application on this, and people are doing home sharing, and it's also completely distributedly hosted with no central company in the middle. You want to, so that the Airbnb company has its own way of making money, because they're charging people for stays and insuring them and whatever. They're paying, instead of paying for massive cloud-hosted infrastructure, they're paying micro-hosts, micro amounts for doing the hosting. And the way that you get paid is basically by unlocking a portion of your log for the work that you've done. And that's, again, signed by all the parties, so you can't tamper with it. And that you send them essentially an invoice. We're calling that a proof of service invoice, which is the application provider's key to unlock that portion of the log, which also serves as the way that they can collect the statistics about what's happening on their application. When it's all spread out across thousands or millions of different hosts that they don't control, how do they know who's using their app and how? Well, part of how is you're providing the log information in order to get paid. So remember when I was talking about Fernanda and I doing a transaction, how we both have to agree? Well, this proof of service invoice is a kind of, as an invoice, it's a pre-authorization for the payment. You're basically saying, I've already agreed to be paid this from this person, from this entity. So that when they go through to make the payments, they don't have to wait for a human on the other side to agree. The transaction can be automated. So that's why I didn't answer the automation question earlier, because there's a little more complicated. Because if you don't have a pre-authorization token, either a promise or a request, then it can't be automated. You have to be able to the app has to be able to find a token that allows this transaction to happen in order for it to be automated. Is this making sense? Other questions? Too much depth?
I guess I'm wondering, because I'm trying to make this big distinction between how the crypto is accounted for and how that relates to like the content, like all of the personal data that everyone's concerned about, like, I want to post this, or I want this to be private, or whatever. Like, is there anything native to Holo, not related to how specific apps function, that has any bearing?
About privacy.
Yeah.
And I have that a little later, but the basic thing is, can we do that later? Because I'm going to have to explain all those other things to really answer your question. The answer is yes, your private chain entries would remain private even if you're accessing it just through a browser, but your publicly shared things would be being hosted by a host so that they actually can be servicing interactions and validation, because there's a whole bunch of error checking that happens throughout the DHT, and people who are supposed to be storing the things that you're sharing need to be able to validate them against you. But since you're not answering, you're not a server, you're in a browser, you're not answering requests that people can validate against you, somebody has to act as that proxy.
Right. I'm just concerned, like if I'm a member of a group who's really excited to have an app where we're able to communicate with each other, we have the, Google in the middle, we have Facebook in the middle. What's to stop there being a sense that like, okay, now we just have this app developer in the middle?
Well, an app developer in the middle, the app developer, getting into my terminology of roles here, but so we have a few different roles. The host, the app developer who writes an app, the application provider who runs and operates an app. So like the developers who write a Airbnb may not be the ones running the business and collecting money and do it right. In fact, my experience from many years in the software industry is that frequently the app developers really don't want to be the service provider. They just want to build stuff. And they want to go and build the next cool thing, and they want to hand that over to somebody who's being the provider. So the app developer is not very likely to be in the middle, but the provider would be. And there's a few different options. So one of the things is that I'm betting that 90% of the use cases would be that it's being paid for by an app provider, but there are also apps that don't have to be that way, where they could be user paid. But users don't like to pay right now. So I think that's going to be a very small fraction of the apps. But the other thing is, if your concern is fundamentally about, I just want to hold my data, then install Holochain. And then you don't use Holo to host it. You can completely hold your data. If you're worried that it's going to be scattered among thousands or millions of boxes, one of the things that you see about the data intelligence of these apps, even something like, take Telegram, for example, which is like an encrypted communication tool, they can't read the content of your message, but they know who you communicate with, how often, how long, what hours, like there's things in there where you may be able to. There's a lot that you can get from that metadata, all being aggregated into one big corporation who then does big data analysis on that stuff. The chances of an individual having fragments of usage and data, because these things are, your requests and usage are spread around many different places, it's much harder.
But at the same time, if I were a member of an intentional community trying to coordinate like a particular plan, we could kind of like nominate someone to be, to play that like provider role essentially.
That's right. You could use trusted hosts, and you can hosts can select their apps, and you wouldn't have to publish. You wouldn't have to publicly publish your app, and you wouldn't have to make all of the data public necessarily either. You can do private entries. It's just you want to be aware that the word public does mean openly shared within that app, not within all apps, which is another difference between Holochain and blockchain. Is blockchain is monolithic. Every Ethereum smart contract runs on one Ethereum blockchain, which is growing, last I knew, at over 5 gigabytes a day. So it's big. I wonder what the current, I think it's over 400 gig right now. So everybody's holding everything, where in this case, if you're doing your intentional communities app, if you're doing a Slack team, only the 20 people on your Slack team are running that app. And it's separate. It's in a separate Holochain from all of the other apps. So that also makes a difference. So we talked about hosts, application providers, application developers. Infrastructure provider is Holo, and what that means is that there's actually some transaction fees on these micro transactions, and the transaction fees basically pay for the ongoing software maintenance and development. One of the problems we're also trying to solve is that open source software often has no good ways for maintaining, paying people and having maintenance revenue and that kind of stuff. So this is basically a maintenance fee on the network that if that fee grows, part of what we want is to have a portion of that also go to crowd-directed spending, so that the hosts and people and application providers can talk about what their preferred features and priorities and that kind of stuff are and direct monies toward those things. So we're trying to build a whole inclusive community around that, but we need some revenue for nourishing that software development. Everybody shouldn't be starving because it's open, and then there's this other weird thing, which is the reserve accounts, which we haven't talked about, but it's a way that we want to provide liquidity for the hosts so that people can come to, initially Holo would be the only reserve account, but that could expand in the future, but they could come and buy hosting credits on this distributed hosting network in Bitcoin or Ether or dollars or euro or pesos or pounds or, and then get the Holo credits that they then go spend for the hosting, and then the hosts can redeem back out for the monies that were paid in, so that the hosts can use it to pay their internet bill or their rent or, that kind of thing. They can convert it back to currencies that may be useful to them on a daily basis, which is again a part of our commitment to have this be not a hoarding system, but one that's actually used for economic activity and exchange. Anything else about the currency side before I go to some of the hosting side stuff and privacy and... No. So when you have a box, a hosting box, and you power it up, you are going to configure it. You're going to walk through some basic questions so you can set up your preferences. And ideally, that will be done from your cell phone or from another computer that, you're going to plug this box into the back of your internet router and just hopefully, for many people, be able to set it and forget it. Some people may have want to tweak their things more and garden, maintain it, do stuff, but we want to give people the option of just having this be your home base. So you start off by making it your home base. You set up the Holochain part. Are there any apps that you want to jump into, like the DPKI, the Distributed Public Key Infrastructure, that helps you with key management, because key management is a challenge in the crypto space. It's one that nobody has solved really well. I think DPKI is, I'm biased obviously, but I think it's best approach that I've seen for being able to have a way that even if you lose your keys for an app or things like that you could still regain, or if you lose your device that those things are on or something like that, you could still regain control of your identity, your app, your history, by being able to have key revocation methods, like 3 of my 4 buddies sign off that this is me and can revoke the old key that would be running on that device and allow me to create a new key that I can run on a new device, things like that. Right now, like in the crypto world, if you lose your key for Bitcoin or Ether or whatever, you've lost the money. And if somebody else gets control of that key, they have your money. Like that's it. There's nothing you can do. There's no revoking it. There's no identity apart from the keys. So sorry, I'm just talking about the configuration process. You may want to set up some of your own apps for your own security and use, going on, moving forward. If you want to set up your own Twitter, your own Slacks, your own, whatever, then you set those things up. Then you configure the Holo app and say, what kinds of things do you want to host? You could choose from different categories. You could choose specific apps. I want to host the distributed Wikipedia just because I want to support Wikipedia, and I'll host it for free, or whatever. Like, you could set those kinds of preferences. Or you can use some autopilot kind of settings. Again, this is to do with the sort of, we want to enable people to set it and forget it and not have to think too much about it and still have it be able to be useful to them and the ecosystem. And the autopilot would configure apps for you and potentially remove apps over time or install apps based on demand in the network. So when there's apps that need hosts, then there's an opportunity for you to get paid, and you want it to turn on and host that app, spin it up. And also pricing. You can set pricing. You can set pricing specific to apps, or you could use that autopilot kind of feature for setting pricing where you want to make money, you want to charge enough, but you don't want to charge so much that the app provider algorithm will never choose you to host. So being able to just kind of have your price land nice mid-market range, it will help you actually get used as a host and make the money.
How will somebody who buys a box be able to figure that out?
If the default, this is about smart defaults, the default is it's turned on, they would have to explicitly change this to do manual pricing because they wanted to do manual pricing. So it's just a thing about trying to make it easy so that non-technical people can power this up and basically be able to use it with just walking through some questions on a setup screen. Is that good enough? Did you get?
So what would be the incentive for someone to change the price? Up, not low.
Well, for example, there's a bunch of interesting things about the way this system works in terms of we're trying to enable a smart ecosystem instead of bind everything to a smart contract. You could say the whole Holo app is a really sophisticated smart contract about being able to make payments and all that kind of stuff, because it is, right? It's running on a decentralized system, and it's a very sophisticated smart contract. And there are some things inside that which you could also call smart contracts. But, for example, the proof of service invoice that I was talking about earlier, because those are shared to the DHT, so that there's an asynchronous method for people to receive them. Because what you want is to not have the whole system break down just because somebody's internet connection has glitched or something, and now it's holding up other transactions and there's a backlog. So if you're able to share it through the asynchronous method, then they come through and they can clear out their invoices by paying the proof of service things, right? But what that also means, there may be an agreement or a norm about how quickly app providers will pay their invoices, but what if they're not paying their invoices fast enough? What if they don't have the credits to transfer? Well, it may be that you are willing to, so first of all, that becomes transparent. You can see how many proof of service invoices are sitting there unpaid and how old they are. So right away you can see how long this app provider is taking to pay people. And you can say, I don't want to host them. They take 60 days to pay. I want to be paid in 6 minutes. Yeah. But you can make that choice. It may be that it's your buddy's company. They're a startup, and they're in a startup mode, and they don't have a lot of capital, and they're having some friends capitalize them with computing power, and you're okay with storing up those things as getting paid someday, but not yet, or whatever, right? Like, that's an option. But you were asking about price. Why might you change the price? Well, you might be willing to service slow payers, but charge more. For example, right? You might be willing to say, yeah, you take 30, 60 days to pay instead of 3 minutes or whatever, and I'm okay with that because I don't need the cash right now, but I'll host you, but I'll charge more, right? So you might change the price to be less competitive with other hosting because this person has less hosts to choose from because hosts don't want to wait 60 days to get paid. So that might be a reason you might change the price, for
So
example.
it's just giving choices.
It's about giving
More
choice,
possibilities.
empowering that
But
kind
we
of.
don't know what it would be.
That's right, empowering that agency. Yeah. Other things about that? So, what?
Are you the person to ask about like what if would an internet service provider potentially not like the setup, you know, like
Would an internet service provider block these packets? Is that the kind of thing you're asking? They might try to block or rate limit. A lot of internet service providers do packet inspection and do things like suppress BitTorrent traffic and stuff like that. Shoot. Remember I said I had a 3:30 phone call? It's 3:30.
We can do part 2 tomorrow.
We're so close.
Okay.
But the traffic is encrypted, and there can be different ways of masking it, including VPNs or things like that. And I think we're just gonna have to see how the market responds around that stuff.
Do we
Yeah,
like
like
supposed to
most
run a VPN to be able to run this on their box?
Yeah.
Like
Wait. What was your question? Do you have to have?
If I'm gonna plug in a Holo box in my router at my house, do I have to run a VPN to be able to do that?
You do not have to have a VPN running to do that.
sorry,
Yeah. So one of the weird things, though, about this stuff is we think of the web as decentralized. And, in one sense it is, right? Like all of the web servers are not in one place. They're in, Amazon and Google, and there's like in 5 places now. No. It's kind of semi-decentralized, but even the whole architecture of having like one name to go to that resolves at DNS root servers, that resolves down to an IP address to reach that web server where the website is hosted, that all is much more centralized than the world of Holochain, which is completely decentralized. So when you've sort of stepped into this completely decentralized world and you look back to the current internet and web that people think of as decentralized, you start seeing how centralized it is. And that one of the reasons that Holo exists is to make a bridge between those two worlds. So one of the things that we have to be able to do is resolve domain names to boxes, right? So if you type in fairbnb.org or whatever to a browser, we have to have a way of choosing what box or boxes are going to service your request. Because there's no centralized server. So how do we do that? So we have to actually provide a kind of centralized DNS resolution system, and this is going to be very similar to the way content delivery networks do that now. When you put a content delivery network between users and your website, the content delivery network caches some of your information out at various places, some of your images and that kind of stuff out at various places. And when somebody asks they try to resolve your IP address, they use the content delivery network's DNS to resolve it to an IP address that's nice and close to you, so that things load faster and they don't take as long. They have lower latency and higher bandwidth. We're going to be doing similar kinds of strategies, except it's an application delivery network instead of a content delivery network. I just want to underscore that that's one of the key differences between things like Filecoin or Storage or Made Safe. Or a lot of times people start thinking Holochain is a lot like one of those apps, but those are all file storage, static content, and this is all applications, living, dynamic. It's more like a live database, distributed database thing with application logic and rules on top of it. And then just a few more pieces is that to make this work fast for people, we're going to have to actually push some things down into their browser, kind of like, some of you may not know this, but like jQuery is a common JavaScript library that's used that probably all of you have cached on your machine right now, so that when you load a page that's using jQuery, you don't actually have to go get it because you've already loaded it recently enough that you don't have to load it again. And then it provides a bunch of scripts and rules that make it easier to write some JavaScript stuff. We would be doing some similar things. We're calling it Holoquery at the moment, to basically speed up some things on the client side and be able to handle some of the making of simultaneous requests from multiple microhosts, so you're not limited to one person's bandwidth. Privacy. Did the privacy things get answered along the way, or is there?
I think so. I was pushing it all the while, so
Yeah.
I think
Okay.
it's mostly there.
Okay, cool. Does that answer the questions? Holochain, currency, hosting, the
Why
future
did
of the
you- why did you-
decentralized
Here's the thing, why
world.
did you actually create this world though? Because I'm clear there's a lot of like in the weeds of how it all works, but what was the vision for it? What is it that you're trying to have to fulfill in the world by it being there?
We think that whole new patterns become available. Whole new patterns of organizing with each other become available. First of all, from decentralization of information. Then it's not the system admins at the center that technically are controlling everybody's data or value and that kind of thing, or the company that's in the middle or whatever. But more than that, with Holochain, like you have people dealing with questions of like interoperability between blockchains and things like that, where you're trying to have some big abstract monster interact with another big abstract monster. Not just even blockchain interoperability. Think of like Twitter and Facebook interoperability or things like that, where in this scenario the agency is pushed out to the edge because it's agent centric. So if I have a distributed Twitter and a distributed Facebook, right, I could tweak my user interface, because the user interface is loosely coupled, to let me post to both simultaneously, or let every tweet that I do also post to my Facebook. But it's posting as me. We don't have to have the Twitter abstract thing interface with the Facebook abstract thing. It's me. Already I can interface with both of them. So I can bridge at the level of individual. Mm-hmm. And so we think that this is going to create very rapid and unexpected kinds of innovation between connecting these types of data streams that we also, we can't expect. We can't predict. There's going to be fun experimentation. And we're trying to build an ecosystem that actually breeds that kind of creativity and agency that out at the edges.
And why did you build a mutual credit currency? How is that different than?
Well, I mentioned the mutual credit currency design. The whole currency design is really to enable an economy that can flow very frictionless, and it's not or not oriented toward hoarding. It's actually oriented toward practical use. And I think that on top of that, there's going to be a lot more things that can be built when you have something that can handle massive volume and it's just easier for practical use.
There is some question here that says, who can I talk to about implementation critical path strategy?
I would join probably our Mattermost, if you can, the Holo hacker. Welcome, Holo. Holo welcome Mattermost. If we can put a link out on that. We have multiple ones of these channels. And start asking questions there, and then others can also see those questions and answer them. Also, holochain.org and holo.host are places that you can find information. And I need to get on this other call.
Conversation will continue, surely.
Yep.
Yep.
Cool.
Thanks.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You.
What do you get out of that?
Obrigado.